So, another way that you're going to help to bring people from receiving benefits into work is with a new sanctions system. It's a traffic light system for sanctions. So you've got your green light, your orange light, your red light. Will the number of people sanctioned by your government increase or decrease compared to the previous one?
So let's just explain for people what sanctions are. So there is a mutual obligation for someone receiving welfare to do their bit. So for someone on a job seeker, it might be having an up-to-date CV, participating in training, applying for jobs, going to a job interview.
You've got to make an effort.
Absolutely.
We all understand that. So will the number of people sanctioned, beneficiaries sanctioned, increase or decrease under your government?
I would expect it will increase. It's a consequence of people not taking actions to help themselves.
And we should note that it's significantly decreased under the previous government relative to the previous national government.
50%.
Yeah. So what evidence do you have that sanctions are an effective way of getting people into work?
Yeah, so exactly that. So we now have 190,000 people on the job seeker benefit, 67,000 more than 6 years ago. And if we look at the use of sanctions or consequences for people not taking the steps they need to take to find work, that's 50% more.
You've read the report from the Welfare Expert Advisory Group?
Yes.
Quote, there is little evidence in support of using obligations and sanctions to change behaviour. Rather, there's research indicating they compound social harm and disconnectedness. What did that report get wrong?
Yeah, so there's a range of research and I acknowledge that.
What did they get wrong about that?
Well, as I say, there's a range of views around consequences.
So what was wrong about that line from the Welfare Expert Advisory Group?
I'm not saying it's wrong. There's a range of views.
So you agree with them that there's little evidence in support of sanctions?
There's a range of views. They have one view. My view is very clear.
You said you agree with that line.
My view, Jack, is very clear. We have seen an absolute blowing out of welfare dependency under the watch of Carmel Sepuloni and the Labor government. I don't think that's good enough. And I want to make sure, so the traffic light policy that you have referred to isn't just about sanctions. Part of having a system like that is to look at what is the risk that someone is going to be longer term on welfare. So it's also about what additional support do they need.
So what happens if someone gets the red light?
Yep.
The worst scenario, they have their benefits suspended. What happens to them?
Yeah, so there's a graduated series of sanctions.
Yeah, if they're on the red light, they're absolutely at the worst end. What happens to them?
So there's a graduated series. Part of the addition to the sanctions regime that we've proposed with that, there's two non-financial sanctions. So one is money management, for example, so they wouldn't get their benefit cut or reduced. That's particularly of interest to families with children. No, so the maximum is that there could be a 50% reduction.
For families with children, but for beneficiaries without children, the maximum is the maximum, right?
Yes.
So what happens if someone has their benefit totally cut?
Yeah, so
what happens to them?
What happens with many of them is they then, I think the figure is 88%, then comply with their obligations.
What about the 12%?
Well, that's a consequence. So if you think about the thousands of low-income taxpayers who are assisting to fund the welfare system, they think it's quite acceptable that people play their part to find a job. And that's common sense.
I'm just interested, if someone has their benefit cut, in an absolute worst-case scenario, how would they pay to survive?
Well, there'll be a range of options.
Like what?
But the welfare system...
What are those options?
The welfare system
what are those
mutual obligations, and if they are not fulfilling their obligations, then it is quite clear about the fact that the welfare system will not support them beyond that point.
What are their options?
Well, they might go with family, they might go with friends, there might be others that look after them for, community.
Family and friends, except, of course, the WEAG report quote that you agreed with said there's research indicating they compound social harm and disconnectedness. So family and friends might not be an option.
Yeah,
what would be the impact on the child? With the 50% sanction on a parent, what would be the impact on the child if a parent had their benefit cut by 50%?
Yeah, so that's why I've proposed two additional non-financial sanctions.
The money management, for
Yeah,
example.
and community
But you still have that option for a 50% cut to a parent beneficiary of the child. So I want to know, in that worst case scenario...
Well, I'm
and I
not
appreciate
anticipating that will be used in the same range that it was.
But it will be used?
Yep, and it's used now.
So what
and
happens,
it was used under Labor.
So what happens to those children?
Well, their families, as I said, 88%, then comply with their obligations. And it's a final resort. It's a last resort. So I don't want to leave the impression that that is something that happens very often. So if you look
But it does happen, and it will happen under your government.
It does, and it's a final step.
Yeah.
Look, if you think about the working income frontline staff, they work incredibly hard to support people to do their bit, but there will be some that actually refuse to. And there should be a consequence. And
for their children as well.
That's only fair to tax-paying New Zealanders that there is a consequence.
Is it fair to their children?
Well, as a parent, I think it's really important that parents with children
That's not the question,
take
though.
the responsibility.
Is it fair to their children? Yeah.
The option is that they comply with the obligations.
Kids should choose better parents.
They're not unusual. They're not unusual, and they're not onerous obligations.